Hi guys, we're back with another video. Today we are looking at the Fantastic Four life story, starting all the way from the 1960s. In case you missed it, we've also covered the entire Spider-Man life story in another video, if you want to watch it later. Now let's begin. The story begins in 1961 at the White House, where the President, J.F. Kennedy, was having a meeting with two of the brightest people in the country, Dr. Ricardo Jones and Reed Richards. The President wanted Richards to build a rocket that could send people into space, fearing that the United States would fall behind, especially after Russia had just sent their first man into space. Richards agreed and promised to build a spacecraft in less than 3 months, but Dr. Jones opposed the decision, saying that Reed's designs didn't even look like rockets. Mr. Fantastic kept his word and built the spacecraft, but they needed a special antimatter fuel that hadn't been tested yet. Just 1 day before the scheduled launch, Dr. Jones aborted everything, saying the fuel hadn't been tested and it would take at least 20 years before they could try again. Reed and Sue refused to accept this and wanted to go into space themselves, but they needed a good pilot. Luckily, Sue's brother knew just the right guy for the job. Ben Grimm agreed to pilot the ship since he had recently been fired from his job and had nothing better to do. The team of 4 snuck inside the base, equipped their spacesuits, and Reed reassured everyone, saying that if the ship exploded, they shouldn't worry because the suits were flame-resistant. The launch was a success, and the ship took just mere seconds to reach space, but something was wrong. Even though they had done thousands of simulations in the laboratory, the ship was hit with cosmic rays that had strange effects on the crew members. Johnny suddenly burst into flames, while Sue's body began to fade away, becoming transparent. Ben Grimm experienced one of the worst effects, as the cosmic rays turned his body into hard, cold rock, while Reed's body began to stretch out, almost as if it was made of rubber. Richards was able to abort the mission and activate a failsafe to return to Earth, but not before experiencing a terrifying vision. For a few seconds, he saw a cosmic being of immense power, one that could consume entire planets and destroy Earth. After returning to Earth, the 4 began developing powers that were hard to control at first, but the only one who hated the effects was Ben Grimm, who blamed Richards for turning him into a rock. However, the President congratulated them on being the first Americans in space, calling them the Fantastic Four, and the entire country celebrated their achievement. It wasn't long before the Fantastic Four became a team that fought criminals and villains across the country, but life went on. Reed and Sue got married and even had a son together named Franklin, while Ben broke up with his girlfriend, fearing she wouldn't be able to love the monster he had become. But Reed couldn't forget the vision he had in space and warned the President, saying they needed to prepare because a malevolent cosmic being was coming to destroy the planet. However, the President didn't take him seriously and called it a space demon. Reed wanted more proof and decided to take things into his own hands, so he built a machine that could recreate what had happened to them in space. The machine was a success, and he was able to replicate the vision from before, but things didn't go as planned. He came face to face with the cosmic being, who said his name was Galactus, the destroyer of worlds. The first time was just a vision, but this time Galactus was able to look back and knew where they were, saying he was coming to destroy them. They were able to stop the machine, but it was too late. The damage was done. Galactus knew where they were and was coming for them. They needed to get ready. The story continues in 1972, with Mr. Fantastic giving a speech about the history of civilizations and how the stronger and more technologically advanced races conquer the weaker ones. It didn't take long before he started talking about Galactus, the great destroyer of worlds, who was heading towards Earth, but people thought he was just talking crazy. However, there was someone who believed his story and introduced himself. Tony Stark said he believed him and wanted to help him prepare against Galactus. But Tony wasn't the only one. There was another who believed Reed's story, a man named Victor Von Doom. The Fantastic Four fought one of their greatest enemies, the Mad Thinker, who managed to trap them inside an underground prison and wanted to bury them alive. Luckily, the Human Torch was able to burn away his restraints and free the other members of the team. But the real Mad Thinker wasn't even there. He had used one of his androids. While they were busy fighting, Susan was at home taking care of Franklin, their son. The 1970s were plagued by world conflicts like the war in Vietnam, the Cold War between Russia and the United States, and even public unrest, fueled by women's protests demanding equal rights and fair pay. Susan wanted to be a part of the feminist movement, but things at home weren't going too great. While Reed was busy preparing for Galactus, she missed out on the Fantastic Four missions because someone had to take care of Franklin, making her feel ignored and left out. as if she were invisible to the people around her. Reed and Dr. Von Doom became close friends and worked together, trying to find a way to stop Galactus from destroying the planet. One day, Sue stormed into the office, screaming at Reed, furious as to why she wasn't invited to a special meeting of heroes. Reed had declined for both of them, saying he was too busy to attend, but Susan went alone and met with Captain America, Black Panther, and even Namor, the King of Atlantis. Namor liked her and asked her to give a big speech in their name at the United Nations meeting that was scheduled in a few days. On the day of the event, Dr. Doom had just finished perfecting his armor, which granted him incredible power, saying he wanted to take out all of the heroes and have the people rally behind him. That's the only way to convince people to take the threat of Galactus seriously. He quickly dealt with Reed and rushed toward the United Nations, where Susan was giving her speech. He broke into the building and said he was glad all the heroes were gathered in one place, making it easier to take them out all at once. Doom harnessed the power of the suit and immobilized all of the heroes, saying they would make nice decorations for his palace once he took over the world. Reed confronted him and tried to convince him to let everyone go, but when he refused, Susan jumped him from behind, using Captain America's shield. The attack was powerful and left Doom unconscious on the ground, setting every hero free. Susan had felt neglected for the last couple of years, with Reed focusing all his time on Galactus, while she had to be a mother and raise Franklin alone. She left Reed and took Franklin to live somewhere else. While Ben Grimm moved in with Reed to console him and make him feel better, Susan started dating Namor, and the two of them became romantically involved. One lonely night, while Reed and Ben were watching TV, the telephone rang. It was the Arecibo Observatory in Puerto Rico, informing Reed that the telescope had picked up something big heading straight for Earth. The story jumps to 1984, with Reed Richards and Tony Stark showing President Reagan their newest defense network named Star Wars. The network was designed to protect the entire planet against the incoming Galactus, and they could have it up and running within 5 years. Even though the president was impressed, he didn't believe that Galactus was their biggest threat and wanted to use the network against the Soviet Union to prove to the Russians that the United States was more technologically advanced. Richards was appalled and stormed out of the office, furious that nobody took his warnings about Galactus seriously. However, Tony ran after him and told him to give him some time to convince them. The next day, Reed was invited on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, but the staff told him not to bring up Galactus because it bums out the audience. Tech geek Jose Santini was also invited and mentioned that they needed more advanced computers to handle the country's defense systems, recalling an event where the Soviet defense system misidentified some weather satellites as American missiles. Luckily, the officer in charge chose to ignore the warning and avoided a nuclear launch. Santini met with President Reagan himself and said the Americans had been taunting the Russians for far too long, flying their bombers too close to their borders, and one day the situation might escalate to a full-scale nuclear war. He wanted the United States to be ready and asked the president to give him control of the Star Wars program, saying that with his computer technology, he could get it working within 2 years. The president agreed, but Santini asked for one more thing. He needed the help of Dr. Von Doom, who was incarcerated after attacking the United Nations and attempting to take over the world. While the two of them were being escorted to a helicopter, Santini took out the guards and revealed his true identity. He was actually the Mad Thinker in disguise. Life in the 80s continued, but by now, the Fantastic Four had disbanded. While Johnny Storm enjoyed his popularity, Mr. Fantastic kept himself busy working on artificial intelligence. He was now single after Sue Storm left him to be with Namor, and Ben Grimm was still single, struggling with his appearance. 2 years later, Dr. Doom had finished building a bunker in Latveria, while the Mad Thinker revealed they would need it for what was coming next. The Thinker had run quadrillions of computer simulations of the upcoming battle with Galactus, and in only 0.001% of them did humanity survive. He had a different plan. He wanted to use the defense network to start a nuclear war, destroying most of the planet and making it undesirable for Galactus when he arrived. Meanwhile, the screens at NORAD lit up, indicating that the Soviet Union was preparing an attack. The Russian president dismissed the accusations, but the Mad Thinker had sabotaged the computers to display false data. In response, the United States launched a counterattack, deploying hundreds of nuclear missiles heading toward Russia. After all this time, the Fantastic Four sprang into action, joining forces with other heroes to try and stop the rockets from reaching their targets. They managed to intercept most of them, but one Russian rocket remained, heading toward New York City. The only one who could stop it was the Human Torch. Johnny flamed on and rushed toward the rocket at full speed. He was able to intercept it, and when the rocket detonated, he absorbed all of the explosion and radiation with his body. He prevented a disaster, but at a deadly cost. He fell to the ground, severely injured. His body had absorbed too much energy, and he collapsed, unconscious. He died in the arms of his sister and the Fantastic Four. The story jumps to 1994, with Reed Richards working day and night on building a defense network to protect the planet against Galactus. Tony Stark quit making weapons and instead focused on building machines that benefited mankind. Wakanda and the African Alliance have created a vaccine for AIDS, which they offered as a gift, free to the world. Ben Grimm visits Reed inside his lab, where he is working on artificial intelligence powered by one of the Mad Thinker's androids. Reed's son, Franklin, has some good news. He is getting married. Ben is happy for him and can't wait to meet the future bride, but for now, he has to leave because he's meeting someone. In Central Park, he meets Sally, his former girlfriend. After he was exposed to solar rays and transformed into the Thing, he couldn't bear to see her again, fearing she wouldn't love him anymore. He wanted her to be happy, and she eventually moved on with her life, got married, and even had 3 kids. Ben is happy for her, but deep down, he's still miserable and alone. A scientist from the Arecibo Observatory in Puerto Rico informs the Fantastic Four that the object they spotted 20 years ago and identified as Galactus is heading toward them and accelerating. At this rate, they have just a few years before Galactus arrives on Earth to destroy it. On New Year's Eve, they give a big speech in New York City, reassuring the people that they are working non-stop, and together they will find a way to stop Galactus. The people go on with their lives, including Ben, who discovers online dating. However, things don't go as planned, especially when he uses his human profile picture but shows up as the Thing. But he never stopped trying, and one day, he goes on a blind date. However, he didn't expect the girl he was meeting to actually be blind. He and Alicia hit it off right from the start, and they spent the night talking for hours. Ben hasn't been this happy in years, and he feels like he just won the lottery. He decides to tell her a very personal story, something he's never told anyone. He used to be a pilot in the U.S. Army, dropping bombs during the Vietnam War. They never told him what they were bombing. For him, it was just targets on a map. But when he found out, he was appalled. Every now and then, they were bombing villages and killing thousands of innocent people. He was furious and rebelled against his superiors, taking food from the camp and feeding children who were now orphans because of his bombs. He was later court-martialed and received a dishonorable discharge, but at least he did the right thing. Alicia knows that deep down, Ben is a good man who tries to do the right thing. Being a member of the Fantastic Four and helping people is his way of paying for his sins. She wipes away his tears and kisses him under the umbrella, saying he deserves to be loved. Everyone attends Franklin's wedding, and Ben is happier than ever, but something doesn't feel right. Reed collapses, saying he could feel Galactus. The devourer of worlds was there, and they need to leave immediately. The Fantastic Four jump inside the spaceship and fly directly into space, but something of unimaginable speed and power takes out the entire defense network in just 1 minute. But it's not Galactus, it's his herald, the Silver Surfer. Ben equips his spacesuit and jumps outside, kicking the surfer in the face and knocking him off his board, but the surfer quickly recovers and retaliates, sending Ben toward the sun. Luckily, Reed is able to catch him and bring him back inside the spacecraft before he melts from the scorching blaze. The surfer doesn't attack, he just circles around the globe, observing and analyzing the planet. He then goes straight to the United Nations building and breaks inside, claiming it's too late for the people of Earth. He tells everyone to make whatever peace they can and find meaning in the end, because his master, Galactus, will arrive in 10 years, and there is nothing they can do about it. The story continues in the year 2002, after the world has come to terms with the fact that Galactus is coming to destroy the planet, and there is nothing anyone can do about it. Reed Richards and the other members of the Fantastic Four have been working night and day to find a way to stop the devourer of worlds, but every attempt has been unsuccessful. One day, their experiments are interrupted by an intruder who triggers the Baxter Building's security systems. It was the Silver Surfer, who arrived on Earth 10 years ago to warn its people that his master is coming to destroy them. He tells the story of how he became the herald of Galactus, accepting that role in exchange for sparing his homeworld. The surfer spent thousands of years serving his master, but now he is dying, and someone else must replace him. Galactus offers Mr. Fantastic the chance at becoming the next Silver Surfer in exchange for sparing Earth and its people, but Reed categorically refuses. The surfer leaves, saying Reed has another 4 years to change his mind before Galactus arrives. Next, the Surfer visits Dr. Doom, who has a proposition for his master. Galactus prefers to devour worlds inhabited by sentient beings, as nothing is more satisfying than the power of consciousness. Doom offers to rule the planet and create a breeding camp for Galactus, allowing him to consume 500 million people every year to satisfy his hunger. The Surfer is intrigued and says he will tell his master about it. Life continues for 4 more years, but in 2006, the day finally arrives. Galactus comes to Earth. People hug each other and say their goodbyes, while the Silver Surfer visits the Fantastic Four once again. He asks Reed Richards one last time if he wants to take his place, and this time, much to his wife's surprise, Reed accepts. His family is shocked, but Reed has thought about it deeply, and he believes this is the only way to save them. Somewhere in space, Galactus compliments the Surfer, saying he has served him well. After thousands of years together, Galactus gives him one final gift: death. He takes away the Surfer's power cosmic, and the Surfer quickly reverts back to his human form, a man named Norrin Radd, from the planet Zen-La. When the Fantastic Four arrive, Galactus is surprised to see Franklin Richards instead of his father and asks who he is. Franklin has incredible mental abilities, but he has never been able to control them properly until Black Panther gave him a special headband that amplifies and allows him to focus his powers. Meanwhile, Reed is back on Earth, inside a subspace chamber that allows him to access the power cosmic and amplify his son's powers. There is only one way to defeat Galactus: from within, by entering his mind and lobotomizing him. Galactus tries to defend himself, but there is no way to guard against a mental attack, and Ben Grimm delivers the final blow with a powerful punch to the face, leaving Galactus dead and floating off into the cold embrace of space. While in the subspace chamber, Reed's brain was connected to Galactus, and the mental attack destroyed his mind as well. He was left in a vegetative state, unable to speak, walk, or even eat by himself, but unlike the devourer of worlds, he still had his family. However, things got even worse in the year 2014, after Dr. Doom and his army of Doombots invaded Sokovia, one of the neighboring countries of Latveria. Doom began conquering his neighbors, but most countries chose to ignore this and did nothing. The Fantastic Four were considered heroes, especially after they defeated Galactus a few years earlier and saved the entire planet. However, most of the older heroes had retired, including Captain America. Reed Richards was now in a vegetative state because he had connected his mind with Galactus when they tried to stop him, but his family was taking care of him: his wife Sue, his son Franklin, and of course his friend Ben Grimm. The new generation of heroes was desperately fighting Doombots in Europe, trying to stop Doom's invasion from progressing, but the robots were made from vibranium and nearly indestructible. The Invisible Woman visits Captain America in the Stark retirement home for heroes and asks for his help in stopping Doom. But Captain America wasn't the fighter he used to be. He had retired long ago and declined the offer, even though he wanted to help. Reed's mind was still conscious, but he couldn't communicate with the outside world and spent his days staring into the void, remembering his life and, of course, Galactus. Spider-Man and Captain Marvel were barely surviving an onslaught of Doombots, but they weren't alone for long. Old Tony Stark decided to show up and help, bringing his friends, the Fantastic Four, along with Black Panther. The fight quickly turned in their favor. Doom was furious after his army of robots was defeated. He ordered his second-in-command to execute the general and then himself as well. Doom had forced the Mad Thinker to work for him and build his armies, but after this defeat, he wanted to kill him and blew off his head. Sadly, it wasn't the real Mad Thinker, just an android pretending to be him. Doom decided he wanted to deal with the heroes himself and ordered the activation of all his Doombots. He arrived in Symkaria and surrounded the heroes from every direction, vowing to kill them all and build a new world once everything was over. The Invisible Woman used her shield to protect the heroes, but she couldn't hold it for too long. Luckily, she didn't have to, because someone struck Dr. Doom from behind. It was Captain America, who decided to assemble one last time and join the fight. Doom was beaten, but he refused to give up and activated all of his Doombots, sending them new coordinates. The robots flew all over the world and began attacking everything and everyone. Doom wanted to destroy the entire world and rebuild it in his image. Back in New York City, one of the Doombots arrived at the Baxter Building, but it wasn't there to kill Reed or his son, Franklin. It was actually the Mad Thinker, who wanted to help. He explained that he had built a back door into every Doombot that would allow him to destroy them all at once, but the shutdown codes were stored in one of his droids, which only Reed had access to. Sadly, in order to get the codes, they would need Mr. Fantastic to speak with them. Reed was conscious and could hear everyone talking, but he couldn't speak. However, he was able to move his hand and reach inside one of the files, pulling out an android version of himself. This android had most of Reed's memories, and the Mad Thinker was able to access the shutdown codes. The heroes were slowly losing the fight when, out of nowhere, the Doombots began to self-destruct, turning into nothing but scrap metal. Before Reed fought Galactus, he had downloaded most of his thoughts and memories into this android, hoping that someday it would be useful, and he was right. Even though Reed couldn't talk, the android spoke on his behalf, saying goodbye to his family and friends before powering down for the final time. The story ends in 2018, with Sue and her husband moving into the Stark retirement home for heroes, the same place where Captain America was staying. For most of Reed's life, work had always come first, and he was always busy, but now, for the first time in a long time, it was just him and Sue.